Shalom, this is Avi Lipkin here again. You're watching ITVN, Israel TV Network, and we are studying more about the Islamic Jihad and the history of Arabia, the history of the early Bible, and things that really haven't changed very much in 3,500 years and bring us to where we are today. And in my previous teaching about Arabia and about the Black Stone in Mecca and Jethro, the high priest of Medina or Midian, we talk about the experience that Moses had and things that were made very clear to him on the other side of the pond in Arabia. And then he comes to Pharaoh and he commands the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go so that they may go around the circles in the desert. I spoke about this in the previous program. I say this is a takeoff on the Hajj to Mecca, and indeed Chag, which means holiday in Hebrew or celebration, also means to go around in circles. And I believe around the Black Stone, and I showed the phylacteries in the previous program. And I mentioned also a story about fornication with temple prostitutes in the ancient Canaanite and Midianite and Egyptian and Greek and Roman religions, and how God says that this is an abomination. And indeed, in Acts 15 and Acts 21, Christians are commanded to avoid fornication with temple prostitutes. And as a result of this incident with Zimri and Cozbi, the Israelite prince and the Midianite princess, and they're skewering by Phineas or Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron. A few chapters later in the book of Numbers, there's a big desert war, and 5 Midianite chieftains come to fight Israel, and one of them is Sur. Sur means the rock. I believe he was the chieftain of the Black Stone in Mecca, and he gets killed and 4 others. And just right after that, as we start the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 2, verse 2, God says to the Israelites, enough being encamped on this mountain, turn north and go to the land of the Amorites that I've promised you. Now, if God says turn north, where were we? As they say in the south, we were in the south, And as I said before, Jethro has to get out of Dodge. He comes with us to the Holy Land, and he receives an allotment of land for his family in the Lower Galilee. And these people today are the Druze people. The Druze are descendant from Abraham, just as we are. We are from Isaac, they're from Jethro through Midian, and of course the Arabs are descended through Ishmael. One big, very, very unhappy family. But the Druze in Israel are very good citizens of Israel. They serve in the army, they pay taxes, and they vote. And in a few minutes I'm going to talk a little bit about Syria. But what I wanted to do first was to share a little bit more about the proof that the 38 years in the desert were in Arabia, then 2 years pretty much in Jordan and Iraq. And I wanted to acknowledge 2 very dear friends of mine, Jim and Penny Caldwell, who spent 12 years in Arabia. And they show the proof, indeed, that there are footprints, which are symbols of God's presence, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God's presence in Arabia, footprints in the land of Israel, which my son is doing. And also Adam Zartal, rest in peace, the famous archaeological genius who proved what he proved. And I'm going to share this in a few minutes. But one thing I wanted to share, people say, oh, no, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, these 2 names are synonymous, and they are in the Egyptian peninsula of Sinai, a place today called Santa Caterina, which was built by Helena, the mother of Constantine. And I don't know how fast you walk, but the proof of Saudi Arabia today being the place of the real mountain of Moses can be found in 1 Kings chapter 19. Now, if you remember, in the first chapter, in 1 Kings chapter 19, there was a contest between Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, and the 450 priests of Baal or Baal. And the gamble basically is if Baal is the true God, he will take the offering of the 450 priests of Baal. And if God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the true God, he will take the offering of Elijah. And you know the end of the story. that God takes Elijah's offering, and as a result, whoever loses the gamble gets beheaded. So the 450 priests of Baal get beheaded, and Hillary comes and says, Jezebel, excuse me, and says, you know, what Elijah did to the 450 priests of Baal, I'm going to do to him, because she was with the 450 priests of Baal. And so Elijah flees to Beersheba, which is part of Judah, and then he walks into the desert a day away from Beersheba, very tired, probably dehydrated, and falls asleep. And then the angel of the Lord awakens him and gives him water and food. He eats, drinks, goes back to sleep again. So he's probably really dehydrated. So the angel of the Lord gives him more food and water and says, awake and arise, you have 40 days and 40 nights walking in the desert until you reach Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb, according to Jim and Penny Caldwell, is 5 miles away from Mount Sinai. They're synonymous, they're in the same mountain range, and they are one next to the other. And Jim and Penny Caldwell also found the split rock there. So this is very interesting. If you're interested in more details, you can look up Split Rock Research. That's their website. And they'll be glad to help you with selling you their book or their DVDs. I also sell their DVDs when I'm on the road. But the point I'm saying is 40 days and 40 nights walking in the desert. If you take a compass on a map and you work your way south from Beersheba, you're going to pass Eilat and find yourself on Mount Sinai, which is in northwest Saudi Arabia. Now also, I know some rabbis won't like it that I say this, but in the New Testament, in Galatians 4:25, it speaks about Hagar and Mount Sinai, which are in Arabia, directly beneath Jerusalem. And in the Greek, beneath means that the longitude is the same longitude. If you draw a line straight south from Jerusalem, you hit the real Mount Sinai in the Arabian desert. Very important point. Now, the Israelites who were in Arabia, I believe, and were encamped on that mountain, Mount Sinai, it was a very big geographical area to hold 3 million people, or whatever the Bible says they were. And there were footprints in places where the holy places were. And you cannot erase the footprints. You have to destroy the rocks and grind them to dust. These writings, I think, are a takeoff on the Ten Commandments written by God's finger. There's something not human, something supernatural or divine about the footprints that were found on the rocks in Arabia. And so this is something that Jim and Penny have discovered. Now, I'm going to shift. And what I'm going to say is, let's look now at Jordan and Israel. Now, the Israelites are 38 years in Arabia, Mount Sinai being northwest Saudi Arabia. When you climb the mountain to the top, you can see the Gulf of Aqaba or Gulf of Eilat, whatever you want to call it. And when the Israelites move north, they move also to the east to avoid confrontation with our cousins, you know, the Edomites and others there, who Moab and all that, because these are all cousins of ours. And God takes them, I believe, kind of close to Iraq. The name Basra appears in the Bible also, which is Iraq. And then there is a disagreement between the archaeologists and historians who say that all this story about the invasion of the Holy Land by the 12 tribes of Israel, these are all fairy tales. They never really happened. There's a theory. You know, people are allowed to have their own idea. But what has happened is, after the Six-Day War in 1967, a lot of geographical places have been discovered that were under the ground. And as the archaeologists came in and modern science came in and carbon dating came in, and they found pottery sherds of the 1200 BC, which were Israelite pottery sherds, it proves, yes, that the Israelites did come across the Jordan. And we find these pottery sherds in the North Samaria area and North Jordan River area. Of course, the Battle of Jericho was more to the south, but the Israelites cross over more to the north on the path that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob took when they were going to Babylonia and back. Now, what I want to do now is I want to tell you a little something from my own personal childhood. When I was born in 1949, and in 1962, I was 13 years old, stamp collector, and still am a stamp collector. And the United States Post Office issued a postage stamp about commemorating the Civil War. And there was a battle called the Battle of Shiloh. And this was in April of 1862 in Tennessee. And I remember when I was in Hebrew school, and I was trading stamps with friends in Hebrew school, which is not exactly a Jewish thing, but we were trading stamps. And my Hebrew teacher says to me, you know that there's a Shiloh in the Bible, there's a Shiloh in Israel. I said, oh really? I thought it was in Tennessee. No, it's in Israel. I said, where? And the teacher said, we don't know. It's under the ground somewhere. And 5 years later, in 1967, with the Six-Day War, Israel liberates Judea and Samaria, and all of a sudden Israeli archaeologists go looking for the biblical sites, and they find them. And there is an Arab Christian village up in the mountains called Kafr Sila in Samaria. So the Israelites went up to Kafr Sila and said, do you know where Shiloh is? And they said, yes, right down there in the valley. And so the archaeologists came in and they found the remnants of 4 Greek Orthodox churches. And they dig and they dig and then cover and then cover, and they find a mosaic in Greek from about the 7th century, which says, may the Lord Jesus have mercy on the people of Shiloh. Bingo! Thanks to Jesus, we know that this was indeed Shiloh. And since then, the whole city has been uncovered and is being uncovered. A tell is a multi-generational, multi-level mound of cities that were built one on top of the other. As the previous city gets destroyed, the next civilization builds on that. And so we found Shiloh. Now, what's the importance of finding Shiloh? Part of the legacy of 2,000 years of exile of the Jews from the Holy Land is that many of these places disappeared from history. And so the so-called modernistic, atheist, apostate archaeologists and scientists come out and say, well, you know, the Bible really is a book of fairy tales. And even our Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, rest in peace, who was assassinated, said the Bible is a book of fairy tales. The reason he said it was because he was a socialist. Socialists don't believe in God. Socialists don't believe in the Bible. They just look at the Bible as a curiosity. And what has happened is that quite a few generations of archaeologists have lived and studied and researched in the Middle East, saying that Moses never existed, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob never existed, Joshua never existed, Solomon, David, and Saul never existed, that these are all fables, all fairy tales. Now, if you discover the city of Shiloh, then you have discovered the place where the prophet Samuel was born and raised and officiated. And what do we know about Samuel from the Bible? That he anointed King Saul and King David. And many of the modern, so-called modern thinking archaeologists say there's no proof that David existed or that Solomon existed, even though they did find a pottery sherd in the north of Israel that says House of David. So what's happening today, and this is what I'm so proud about with my son Aaron, who's CEO of Lipkin Tours, is that we are now, through science and archaeology, proving the veracity of the Bible. Jim and Penny Caldwell are proving the veracity of the Bible in Arabia. And don't forget, Arabia, Jordan, Israel are really one geographic unit, because that's the area that was covered by the Israelite tribes in their wanderings. And Adam Zartal is a very interesting gentleman. He died, unfortunately, in 2015. He was a kibbutznik, and meaning living in a kibbutz, which is socialist. He was not what you'd say a religious or Orthodox Jew. And in the Yom Kippur War, he was wounded by shrapnel from a bomb which landed near him, exploded, and he was very severely wounded. And for the rest of his life, he had to hobble around on crutches. And he was not really very much good to work in the kibbutz anymore. And they said, what do you want to do with your life? He said, I want to become an archaeologist. So they sent him to college to study archaeology. And he was not a religious Jew. He was not, to his last day, he was not what you'd call a religious Jew. And he studied archaeology according to the mainline system, which is basically that nothing is true unless it's proven archaeologically. In other words, if you don't prove that David existed archaeologically, David doesn't exist. And this is very fallacious, because not because you don't find the facts, David didn't exist. King David existed because it says so in the Bible. Excuse me. But what's happening is today we are now discovering that everything written in the Bible really did happen. I'm going to share a few facts about this. But Adam Zartal developed a system, or rather, he was a very loyal student to the system he learned in college. And that is that you organize a group of 10 men and women with about 1 or 2 yards between them, and they move, they advance as a phalanx. And they're constantly looking to the ground to see if they see pottery or coins or anything reminiscent of whatever civilization was there. And they collect and they note down geographically everything that they find and where they find it. They take it back to like a laboratory or library type facility, and everything is in boxes and everything is labeled exactly where it is. And then you go back a second time when you see that there's conclusive proof that there was a civilization there, and then you start digging and finding things. And it's not because he was a religious Jew. He wasn't. He was just an archaeologist and a scientist. And what happened was he discovered Joshua's altar on the mountain of Eval. It's a very long story. I won't go into it completely. But they find a sacrificial altar area, which is exactly the same dimensions as what eventually became the sacrificial altar in Jerusalem. And he proves that this is the Joshua's altar where the blessings and curses were prayed over the 12 tribes to understand what God is commanding us to do in the Bible. And there are other things also. My son has produced 3 DVDs. Joshua's altar, by the way, is the 4th DVD, which is now being prepared. We are going to offer this, the 4 DVDs together with the book. At this moment, we have 3 DVDs and the book. The very, very first DVD that my son produced was about the footsteps of God, in which, just as Jim and Penny Caldwell mentioned footsteps in Arabia, there are giant footsteps in Israel, in Argaman, in the Tirza Valley. They have found 6. There may be, and probably are more. And these footprints are about the size of football fields, 2 or 3 football fields. And the Israelites, listen carefully, the Israelites would go around in procession 7 times around the footprints. The footprint represented God's presence. God says in Deuteronomy and in Joshua, wherever your feet will tread, I will give to you. And so the footprints are like flags saying God is here, the God of Israel is here, and we are going to serve the Lord by marching around these footprints. So when you come to Israel with Lipkin tours, we're going to take you to Argaman, and you're going to see this for yourself. Also, if you go to lipkintours.com, you can also find pictures of these footprints. If you go to Split Rock Research, you can see the footprints that Jim and Penny found. And these are all interesting things that point to the veracity of the Bible. Argaman is Gilgal, one of the Gilgal places. Shiloh, we find, of course, the pre-temple in Jerusalem temple in Shiloh, which was there 369 years. So once you find Shiloh, you know that indeed the Ark of the Covenant rested there 369 years. There's a whole lot of history now that we're studying the Bible in a completely different light, because all of these things really, yes, they really did happen. There's another teaching he did about Bethel. Bethel, for example, is the place where Abraham was promised by God that this whole land of Israel would belong to Abraham and his descendants forever. And an interesting point that many, many Christians don't know, you will not know unless you come to Israel with us and see this, But after Jesus is tempted by the devil in Jericho and he climbs up the mountains, where does he climb up to? He climbs up to a place which is today called Ophrah. And Ophrah is mentioned in the book of Joshua. It's on the hills overlooking the Jordan River Valley. And Ophrah is written with an ayin. And in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, it says Afarim. But in the Latin letters, it's spelled Ephraim. But in the Hebrew, it's Afarim. And in the early Arabic, it was Afarim. And when the Muslims conquered that place, they called it Taibe. There's an Arab Christian town called Taibe. There's a well there. And this is where Jesus drank from. And there's a big monastery there commemorating that. So this is an Arab Christian town called Taibe. The original name was Afarim. And my son lives in Ophrah, which is next to Afarim in Samaria, or rather in Benjamin. You go to Bethel, and there are many, many proofs there. There are literally dozens and hundreds of cave-type funeral sites, caves, burial places. They find oil press, wine press. There are Arab, Muslim, and Christian Crusader ruins there. All of these things would not have happened in Bethel if the place wasn't the holy place. You have to see the DVD to understand this. But Jacob, sleeping on a pillow which was stone, putting a stone under his head, we found the stone. It's there. When you go there, we'll show you the stone where Jacob slept. It's a very unusual stone which is not found anywhere else in the land of Israel. There are 1,000-year-old trees there. There are things that are very unusual, very typical of a holy place when you find them in Israel. And the importance of what I'm sharing now is that at this moment in Israel, there are 100 archaeological sites which are being dug and researched, which have not been brought to the public knowledge yet. But all of these sites are proving the veracity of the Bible. Now, why am I emphasizing this? Because there are a lot of people, so-called liberal modern people, don't believe in God. They're atheists, they're apostates. The whole Bible is a pack of fairy tales. When you come to Israel and you visit these sites and you become an archaeologist, you see that everything in the Bible that is written is true. These things really did happen. The history really did happen. And God is existing because the Bible is true word. And so one of the things I've been sharing for years now is, yes, there is a threat of Islam in the world because Islam believes not in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but in Allah, the moon god. And their Quran is out to destroy our holy Bible of the Jews and the Christians. And their Messiah is coming back to kill the Jews on Saturday and kill the Christians on Sunday. Not exactly the Messiah we're all waiting for, a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew. And the history is being proven more and more every day that our God is the true God. This is very important because we have to convince the Muslims of the truth of our system. And we have to convince the atheists, apostates, and New Agers of the truth of our system. And so I'm very, very proud that I was able to be here sharing this with you. I hope that we will see you in Israel. I'm also forming a Judeo-Christian party in Israel to run for our Knesset. And this party is going to be a party that will unite Jews and Christians in love together. Instead of 2,000 years of hatred, the baggage has to go out the window. And we have to work together in the future for the coming, or for the Christians, for the return of the Messiah. But the bottom line is we have to save Israel from destruction. We have to save the United States. We have to save Europe. We have to save the whole human race from destruction. Our civilization is based on the Word of God. Where there is no Word of God, there is no civilization. And love the Lord thy God and love thy fellow as thyself. If you don't love the Lord thy God and if you love your fellow as yourself, then you cannot believe that our civilization actually exists. Our whole civilization is based on the 10 Commandments, is based on love the Lord thy God, love thy fellow as thyself. And so I recommend to all of you to come to Israel to see these places. I would say go to Saudi Arabia, but the Mountain of Moses is closed off with a fence and military orders to shoot anybody trying to go across the fence. So the Saudis know that there's something going on at this mountain, something very special. And Jim and Penny were able to actually climb the mountain, and they shared that there was something very special on that mountain. And I recommend to all of you to research this, come to Israel, come to the archaeological sites, learn the Bible by walking through all the places where the Bible took place. Go up to Baal Hatzor, where Abraham was given the promise of God. Where you go up on that mountain, you can look down at Sodom and Gomorrah, which is what Abraham did with the angels, and he looked down into the valley and saw what was about to happen there. The Bible is alive, it is true, and it is being proven with every day that goes by. Every day they're finding new places and new archaeological evidence of things that happened in this very special land. Israel is the apple of God's eye. And in Zechariah 2, verse 12, it says that the Jewish people are the apple of God's eye. And in Romans 9 to 11, it says the Christians are the branches and the Jews are the roots of the olive tree. And I believe this. We are together in this. And if we succeed, then the whole world can be saved. If we fail, I don't want to think about the world being destroyed. Then there will be only a small remnant. But I think we can work together and we can accomplish all these things. It could be in New York, it could be in the United Nations, it could be in Washington, D.C., it could be in Moscow. Today, Putin is not a communist anymore. He is a Christian believer. It might not be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from Texas, but he is a believer in his own way. England is having a Brexit revival. Trump is a true believing Christian. Again, not a Texas Christian, but I'm very, very exceedingly happy that the pendulum is swinging back to the right, back towards God, and our civilization will be better for it. So I wanted to thank all of you for watching. God bless you, and we will see each other hopefully in the Holy Land one day soon. God bless you, and shalom.